George Henry Payne was my grandfather, and Myron George Payne was my father. And my grandfather built a house down here at on 1200 South and about 4700 West. He raised his family there, and then my father moved there in 1928, and I was raised in the same house. The house is still standing and in use. And I got some notes here of my grandfather, George Henry Payne, was born 24 September 1854 in Kaysville. He was the son of William Lauder and Margaret Wilson Payne. And his mother died when he was 9 years old. And he attended a one-room school in Kaysville until the age of 13. He had all 8 grades in this one room. And he used to tell a story about the schoolmaster, who was quite a taskmaster. And he wore semi-formal clothes, wore a coat with tails every day, and he had a big sapling willow that he used to maintain order. And when one of the kids would do something wrong, why, he'd bring him up to the front of the class and bend him over his desk and whack him with that willow. And my granddad said when he was 13, they had a little crippled boy in the first, second grade, and everybody felt sorry for him. And, one day the schoolmaster, the crippled boy didn't get his homework or something. The schoolmaster got mad at him and brought him up to the front of the room, and he was fixing to whip him with that willow. And Granddad says that he just couldn't stand it any longer. He slipped up behind the schoolmaster and grabbed the tails of his coat and swung him around, and the door was open, and swung him right out the schoolhouse door. And then he ran out the other door and left school, and that was, never went back to school anymore. And by the time he quit school, he was 13 years old, and I understand he was pretty husky for his age, and he'd been raised on the farm around horses and knew how to handle a team of horses, and I understand he was really good at riding horses, and he would break the wild broncos, and evidently there was quite a few wild mustangs around that they'd capture from time to time, and he'd get jobs breaking those wild ones. And he also learned a lot about treating the sick and crippled animals, which he did for the rest of his life. I remember when I was a kid, he was near 80 years old. People would call him to come and help him treat a sick horse. And long in the 30s, when they had the epidemic of brain fever in the horses, he did a lot of treating, and there was some controversy about him being a veterinary without a license. They said if he can do any good in this epidemic, he's welcome to practice. And after he left school, at age 13, he became a cowboy and herded cattle out along the lake shore south of the Weber River, through Hooper, and I guess clear up through this area too.
Was this for Captain Hooper?
I don't think he was working for Captain Hooper. I think he was herding cattle for some of the people who lived in Kaysville. But I'm not sure about that. But anyway, he was all by himself and taking care of his herd, and he spent 3 or 4 summers up there just as him and his horse taking care of those cattle. I understand at that time there was one building in Hooper where the cowboys could go and get supplies, and they had sort of a bunkhouse there, herd house.
And that was owned by Captain Hooper. And they got a monument over there just where it was standing.
I have heard of that. He also had a dog. He captured a wolf pup in the area while he was out herding cattle and raised it up, tamed it. So he had his horse and his wolf, and he spent his summers out there herding the cattle. And he often talked about his wolf, what a faithful companion he was, and how much fun he had with that wolf. And in the winters, evidently there was some period of time when they brought the cattle in, fed them in the corrals, and in the winters he would run a horses and wagon and haul freight up Weaver Canyon to the railroad crews building the railroad. And they would get, I guess there was a lot of men working on the railroad, and they would get the supplies out of Ogden and haul them up the canyon to supply the railroad workers. And he used to tell a story about one trip in the middle of winter. He was hauling load up the canyon, and one of the wheels broke on the wagon, and his boss or his partner took, they had 4 horses. He took one team and rode down the canyon to go down to Ogden to bring another wagon wheel up. And he was left with the wagon to watch it while the other guy was gone. And a bunch of Indians spotted the stranded wagon, and this 14-year-old boy alone with it, and they decided they'd pull a raid and get away with those supplies. And so there was about a dozen, mostly squaws and young Indians, and they come down and surrounded it, and he had to get up on top of the wagon with his black snake whip, and a big whip for a 4-horse team, and what the Indians, they'd come and surround it. Every time one would get within range, why, he would snap that big whip at him, and he held them off there for 2 or 3 hours. They finally gave up and left before the other guy came back with the wheel. But he managed to save the wagon load of supplies from the raiding Indians. I guess he was pretty good with the whip. And then along early 70s, when he was, I imagine he was 18 to 20 and along in there, he started buying land down in this area. And he went into the business with George Frary, and George Frary built his house over on the island. Granddad built a log cabin on the shore right there, just south of where the gatehouse is. And they would haul cattle and sheep back and forth on a barge. across to the island and back. And
Was this working for the church or this their own?
their own. And they, I don't know how, I understand the church had grazing rights on the island. I don't know how it worked out with Galbraith, or with Frary, George Frary. But I understood that they were doing this with their own cattle and sheep, and they hauled the first buffalo to the island. The buffalo that are there now were the original stock was all over on one of their boats.
We got a history, very few copies of the history of Antelope Island. I'll bet you'd like to read sometime. And it talks about bringing these first buffalo. But I can't remember George Payne being involved with that, but he must have been.
Well, I understand him and George Ferry hauled those buffalo over there, and then they had one of the buffalo cows got a broken leg, and they amputated its leg, and I think it was down close to the ankle, and sewed it up, and it got better, and then they caught it later and made it a wooden peg and strapped it on its leg, so it was a peg-legged buffalo, and it could run around there, and it raised several calves, and once he was over there looking after him, and couldn't find old Pegleg, him and another man, and they run onto this buffalo calf hiding in the grass, and the other fellow spotted the calf, and Granddad says, "Don't go close to it. Stay away. The mother will be after us if he bawls." The guy said, "Oh, he's a cute little thing," and started over to the calf, and the calf jumped up and let out a beller, and here comes the old peg-legged mother across the ridge, and they started running, and of course she took after Granddad. He was running as fast as he could, and she was right behind him, and there was only one little tree there close enough to get to, and he says it was kind of a stunted pine tree, and it leaned a little. And he says he could just feel her breath around his back, and running as fast as he could. And he got to that tree and just sort of ran right up the tree. And he says she kept him treed there for about an hour before she would go away. But that was the old peg-leg buffalo. And she lived for years with that peg leg, raised several calves.
Did your granddad ever have any land on the island? Did he file for any of it like Prairie did?
I don't think so. I don't think so. He did have a stock in the tar pits at the north end of the lake, and they were looking for oil out there, I guess. There's a place where the oil kind of seeped out of the ground, and then the company formed, and I saw an old stock certificate. I've got it somewhere. He had stock in it. Company that had a tar pit.
Remember the name of the company?
No, but I'll see if I can't find that.
If we could get a copy of that, it would be good for
There was
historical.
a company out there, and he owned stock in it.
Yeah.
Dad-in-law took us out there once. And, there was old machinery and that. They'd try to recover that oil, pump steam down to the flow.
Yeah, I'll see if I can find that stock certificate.
That'd be quite an item.
Here it says that George Payne and others incorporated their mining property they own a number of valuable claims, and I presume this is on Antelope Island. Some to water's edge. One cars can be dumped right into the boat. The water is deep enough to admit boat to the shore. This is the Great Lake Mining Company. He was involved with these mining claims on the island.
Yeah, he was, when he had the boat, he was all over the island.
Very enterprising.
All the islands and
What was the name of
shores.
his boat?
Lady of the Lake.
Lady of the Lake, yeah, that was it.
That's Ferrari's.
That was George Payne's, wasn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I read that,
In that
story,
pamphlet we brought to
that
the
pamphlet about
DUP.
his boat, and I
Okay.
never knew the name of it till I got that.
Seymour Miller worked for him on it too.
Well, then it was a water lily that Ferrari
Yes.
owned.
Water lily.
But I read an account, that Antelope Island book. I think they had some errors in their story, because George Ferry's place was on this side of the island. So you know where
Yeah, we put the
they
monument
put the
there.
monument up. And they used to signal back and forth with mirrors. They had some of the big mirrors off of the dresser, and they had signals. They would signal back and forth, and at night they built fires, and if they needed help, they'd build 2 fires. If it was an emergency, they'd build 3, and they could signal back and forth that way. And he, Granddad told about the night they had 3 fires over there from Mrs. Ferry there. And so it would take them quite a while to get over there after they seen the signal.
We're just wondering, George Ferrari, when he came on shore to go get medicine in Ogden, borrowed a horse and buggy. It would either be George Payne or Will Bentley. You heard that story before?
No, but I'm sure it was George Payne, because they were really close partners and worked together.
When Will Bentley helped build a home over there, and we're close friends.
But I hadn't heard that story.
Here's a story that was interesting. It's your interview, but you might as well. They stood up right in conference about not to drink tea. Drinking leprosy scabs and Chinese toenails. And George H. Payne found toenails in his tea one time. And so they was trying to get him to keep the word of wisdom.
Oh, he liked his tea up till he died. The old, the English was, his dad came from England, and so they were English as far as their tea was concerned. He would make his tea in a pot, put a handful of leaves in, and when he'd make another pot, he didn't pour them out, he just added a few more, and it was pretty tough tea. He'd put a lot of sugar and cream in it and drink it, and it was pretty nourishing with all that sugar and cream.
Yes.
But he had to have his tea time just like they do in England, at 10 o'clock in the morning and in the afternoon.
I wonder who put the toenails in his tea that
Well, it come from China.
time. Oh,
They were clipping it or something.
China clipper.
Do you know anything about the guano deposits and the part your grandfather played in that?
I I've heard of it, but I don't know any details about that.
Anything about the big boat that they were in the process of building to haul the guano?
No, he talked about boats and traveling on the lake and that, but I didn't know much about the boats until Joe gave me that story about the
They had a
the
big,
boats.
big one that'd do 300 tons of guano, but they never finished it.
Lake went down.
And Joe's father was a night watchman for 2 years on it.
Yeah, when they were doing all the boating, they could tie their boat right up to the shore there, and that's when the lake was up high. I think it was a couple of years ago. And then the lake went out. Then they started into the saltworks business, and they had this saltworks going.
2 different times, I think.
Well, 2 or 3. They were going pretty good in the saltworks, and the big company, I don't know if it was Morton or probably was.
Inland. And they were charging triple prices from what they were doing.
And they got their saltworks set up and was filling their ponds, and then the big company would hire saboteurs come at night and cut their dikes and let all their water run out of the ponds.
Tell him the interview you had. He might be interested.
Now, this isn't the same place, but I had an interview with Mr. Sutton, who retired from Inland Salt Company. It's now owned by Morton. The first day that he come to work, he didn't know where he was going, but the Inland Salt Company come on up here and dynamited 2 bridges, one just west of West Point Road, one north about 6,000 that was used. They used the bridge to get over the marsh, and then they drive out on their flatbeds, and there was a couple of ponds out in there that people would get their salt and recover it. But it was Inland Salt too that also dynamited the flume there, your grandfather's.
Well, him and a couple of his partners, they were doing this every time they'd get their ponds full. They would cut the dikes and let it run out, and so they started to sit out there at night, and they finally got the gang one night. They were sneaking out there with their shovels, and I think there was 3 of them sitting there, and they had shotguns, and they waited till they got working good, and they were pretty close, and they recognized some of the guys were neighbors around here. They recognized 2 or 3 of them. He never said who they were, but they knew where they were, and they said, "Oh," and okay, let's go. So they all jumped up and started shooting in the air and running after these guys, and they all took off and threw their shovels down, and he was hollering, "Shoot to kill, shoot to kill," and they were firing in the air. It was really scared those guys, and they ran off, left all their equipment, shovels and everything. So they...
Now, is this when Chesney and Ed Bills was partners with your grandfather?
I think so. And then
The description
later,
we have it with straight south past Miller's Farm.
Could be. And then later, well, I guess the lake came up again after that, and then went down again about in the early 20s sometime. Sometime along then, Edward Bill and Granddad set up a salt works out in Hooper. It was right straight west of the center of town of Hooper. And they run that for a while in the 1920s. And when I was a little kid, I was out there a few times and saw that. But then when by 1930, the lake was going out so far that they couldn't get the water. They had a big canal running up, and then a pump pumping out of the canal into the ponds. But the water was out so far that they'd have to wait till the west wind came up. And when they had a good west wind come, rush out there and
Start pumping.
crank up the pump, and start pumping water. But then the lake went out so far that they couldn't do it. And then they could go out, and the lake was so low they could just shovel salt up off the shore there in the 30s. And so a lot of people were hauling salt.
Now, I think your dad sold his salt interest and piece of ground to William Galbraith, who then took over the salt operation.
Yeah, William Galbraith was a pretty good partner of Granddad's, and if I have it right, it was William Galbraith that went to Mexico when the feds started putting the polygamists in jail, and they got a group of the polygamous families decided to go to Mexico. So Galbraith had, I don't know, he had 2 or 3 wives, and he was going to Mexico, and he was trying to get Granddad to drive a wagon and help him get to Mexico. Granddad didn't want to go because he'd be a criminal too for helping him, and but he coaxed him into going. He says, "Well, you know, I've got these families, and I don't want to leave my kids stranded, and all that, so I've got to go. And so if you you've got any sympathy for me, you'll come and help me." So Granddad said, "Okay." He'd go with him, and they went down through Arizona there somewhere towards Mexico, and Galbraith had told him that he would never take another wife, but he couldn't give up his families he had. But they got down and way down in southern Arizona somewhere, and Galbraith met a girl in the wagon train, decided to marry her. So Granddad, he says, "That's it, you're on your own now." And he left the train, and the federal marshals, or whoever they were after this train, so he didn't dare come back this way. So he made his way over to San Diego. I guess somewhere, Yuma or somewhere, he got himself a Catholic priest suit with a white collar and a Bible, and so he traveled in a disguise as a Catholic priest and got over to San Diego and then up to San Francisco, and then came back on the railroad from San Francisco and got back here without getting caught.
I've heard part of that story, but not the last part. He helped quite a few like that. According to an article here, and I'd heard it before, Will Bentley, that lived right to the north, who was also good friends of Frary, it says that he took he and his household down to Mercer, Utah, in 1899.
Helped Bentley move to
Yeah.
Mercer.
Bentley was a railroad man. And his wife, well, they were both LDS, but the Frary was not a member. But they knew each other back in Denver. And your dad was right here to help them. the Frarys, when she gave that talk,
Mhm.
she mentioned George Payne, who was so helpful when they needed to go to a store to get things. They borrow his wagon and things like that. So I guess George Payne and George Frary were quite close.
Yes, that's what I understand. They were real close.
Earl, you mentioned your home. Now, as I understand, there was 2 rooms, stucco, built first. Is that correct? You know, the first part of the home?
Adobe.
Adobe, I mean, yes.
Well, the house, I think the house was all built at the same time. The original house was adobe. It's 3 rooms, and it's about 20 feet wide and 40 long, something like that.
Good size.
With 12-foot ceilings, and they had the main room was a big room with the chimney, the stove, and then the 2 bedrooms in the north end. And the walls were 2x6s with adobe in between, and it's still a real solid house. They got rocks from the mountain and built the foundation out of rocks, cemented together, and built the house on it. And it's still solid as anything, and that adobe makes really good insulation. It's cool in the summer and stays warm.
That'd be well over 100 years old then, wouldn't it, or over 100?
Well, he was married in he was married on 20th of May, 1857. No, that was when his wife was born.
Who was his wife, your grandmother?
Harriet Anley Phillips.
Now there were Phillips living here at the time, and they're related to Joe Bodley. Joe Bodley's wife was a Phillips.
Yes,
Same family.
Same family. No, he was married in January '87, so that would have made him 22 years old when he was married, and so I think 1877. So I think it was about 1880, or shortly after 1877, that they built the house. And they had 2 artesian wells. I think I never have heard the story of how they discovered artesian wells, but I think that was a sort of a drawing point for this area. They could get water and irrigate. And he built a reservoir right by the house, about
But the Upper Canal
60
came in early too.
60, 70 foot square dirt reservoir, and had 2 flowing wells in it. They lined it with clay to keep water from seeping, and then he planted a big orchard along the bank in the sandy area, and watered it with this reservoir.
But he was more of an adventurous type than a farmer.
Yeah, I'm surprised he kind of settled down to farming, and I'm not sure how long it was for when the Hooper irrigation canal got here. I was wondering if they built on the basis of the wells first and then got the irrigation water, or if they had planned.
That's what I'm
canal.
wondering too. I believe they were both going in concert at the time. But this is sort of a ridge here. Maybe the water was a little hard to get up, and so they had to sort of use flowing wells.
Yeah, there's some high area. Well, he built that log cabin about, sometime, I think he built that before he got married. So, along 1875 or 77 or something, it was probably one of the first
70,
buildings in the area.
77 was the first log cabin in this area, and that was Joe Bodley. And 78 was 78 was a log cabin. The first furrow was 77 by David E. Cook when he was a young man.
So they, when he built the house here, then he moved that log cabin up here and reconstructed it. And
It's part of it, the adult then?
No, it was a shed in the yard, and it lasted till about 1945. A tree blew over on it and smashed it. It was in use as a chicken coop and a pig pen and
Yeah, I remember the cabin.
yeah.
Still there when we was picking beans for your dad.
I think it's 44 or 45 that one of the big old cottonwood trees blew down and smashed it.
Rolling Bills has got a log cabin over there.
Yeah, I've seen that. It was moved once too. They just marked the numbers on all those logs and took them down. And they'd set them back up in the same order.
Have you got any idea who owned that to begin with?
Up to Ed Bills.
No.
We got two different things going. One, Isabel and those were saying that was Joe Bodley's home. It was the first home built. And the other is that it belonged to Hadfield when Ed Bills bought the land from Hadfield. And it was over in the corner across the slough there.
Didn't Willard Bandrel have a log cabin up there in his backyard somewhere?
No, I don't remember.
Seems, he had the old cow stable, that was kind of typical, but then there was a log cabin where he kept his harnesses and chicken feed.
No, I don't remember. That.
According to Vita Bodley, it was moved, the log cabin was moved up there to the corner. It was right across from Kerr's to begin with. Moved up to the corner, and it became part of Joe Bodley's second home. But we don't know for sure.
Yeah, I don't know either. Now, it's still pretty good shape. I was looking at it one day with Ruin. And,
I think he's willing to give it to us, and we'd probably take it if it was the first,
if you knew.
if it was Joe
knew
Bodley's.
the history for sure. Too bad we don't know. But anyway, they they had 12 children during the period that they lived.
Know of any artifacts or have any artifacts from your grandfather, the salt industry anywhere?
No, nothing from the salt works. I've got some. He could tell you right to the second what time it was, but I don't watch.
He done a little surveying, didn't he, and plotting this ground out into different lots?
I think so. I don't have much information on the land he had, but he did have different plots of land
He did quite a bit of speculation. I have
in the area.
I've run into his name. I've charted all of Syracuse, but he didn't keep the land very many years. He didn't
Buying
farm.
and selling it.
Yeah, and he's more interested in the lake and taking trips and stuff like this. And that guano and the petroleum and the mining and all of these things kept him busy.
Did he have more than one boat, do you know?
I think he did. He had that Lady of the Lake and
Well, one was called the sloop. I thought George Payne had the sloop. Ferries had
Ferry had a
Lily.
steamboat that blew up on him.
Yeah, but that
And
wasn't the sloop.
my brother Myron was telling us that my grandfather had a steamboat on the lake. Whether that was Ferries, they was involved with Ferry.
And this Simpson that keeps coming up, I don't know whether it could have been your dad or whether it was your grandfather.
Probably both of them. Well, it specifies James Simpson.
Most of the time it says Mr. Simpson. And this William Ogden, have you ever heard of him?
Yes,
You know anything about him?
but I can't remember where he come in. The name is familiar. And Willie Abe Layton was he was often mentioned.
You were acquainted with the youngest Frary,
Yeah, Pete, they call him.
Pete, and tell us about when he'd come and stay with you.
Well, he was in the Army, and he got out of the Army and came and stayed with us about, I don't know, it was early 30s for a while. And then he moved to Salt Lake. Then he came back, and along about 38, my dad had been doing some work with Earl Bodley with a drag line over on the island for that ranch, I guess. And they could drive over from the south end. So Pete wanted to go over and see the old house and where his mother was buried. So one Saturday, I went with Dad, and we went to Salt Lake, picked Pete up, and then drove over to the island and went all the way down where his house was. And
Was the house standing there?
no, it was just a little of the foundation, and he found where his mother was buried. At that time there was a tree and some fence, woven wire fence around the grave. So there was, it was pretty run down at the time, but there was a little bit of a fence around it.
Too bad you didn't make the dedication. That was a great day.
I wanted to go for that, but something came up. I think it was my brother-in-law's funeral or something, and I couldn't make it.
They promised us now to put a fence around the monument so the buffalo won't rub on it.
Good idea. The buffalo tear things up pretty good.
Delore, our mayor, Delore Thurgood, said you can cross now on the south end. Maybe we ought to, well, we'll have to wait till spring now. He said you could see where they put their smoot right on the, right on the plaque.
Hmm. Yeah, might be able to get a fence around it.
Did that have a little pink stone then that marked the grave?
Yeah, there was some kind of a stone. I don't remember whether it was pink or not, but I remember there was a stone there and a tree right there that anchored the piece of fence.
Yeah, that was a cottonwood that George Ferrari planted when they built the home.
It was a kind of a beat up tree. The buffalo had been around there knocking things down.
Yeah, it's burned and tipped over, and now they've dug a hole and replanted it.
Maybe we gotta get that stone fenced around, or they'll rub that. You know, we went down the orchard where the mulberry trees were. They rubbed the bark right off the trees, rubbing their hide against it, you know.
Maybe they'll go to the tree we planted.
The fence was still there. The combination of wire and the post is all laid on the ground, but they were still there when we cleaned up the area.
Yeah, well, that wasn't too long ago, 38, so wire would still be.
Now that was Frank, but they called him Pete, the family did.
Yeah, that's the only name I knew was Pete.
You ever heard the
Perry.
story of when he was a youngster? He's about 3 or 4. He come up missing one day. It was this time of year, I think it was right after Christmas, and they had spent time down at the ranch. They sort of went together with the Walkers, and he got some new mittens for Christmas, but he forgot them. And he decided he'd go back to find these mittens. Anyway, this is after his mother had died, or close to it. I'm not sure how old he was. Just soon after, anyway, the oldest daughter and the oldest son was sort of responsible for the household, and the daughter noticed that he was missing. He yelled and everything, couldn't find him. So they sent the brother, I can't remember his name, Guy, to look for him. And he went clear down to the lake and went over to the fence, and he saw a bunch of buffalo out there grazing. All at once he saw trotting along right through the middle of the buffalo this little 3 or 4 year old guy coming back, and he found these mittens. And Guy didn't dare go out or didn't dare yell at him, just waited until he came to safety. That's a story that we've dug up. A lot of good. We ought to let him use one of our copies. We've only got 2 or 3 copies. Maybe we can make a copy of Antelope Island. It's 136. A professional historian has done it, and he's done a fantastic job. Where your dad's grandfather has had so much to do with the island, you'd find it fascinating. A lot of stories come out of there.
I might be able to tie some things in with it too. Some of the things that Granddad had said.
It even talks about when they made the movies over there, about the buffalo and some of the special buffalo hunts that they had. Some of these things. Was your dad the oldest?
No, he was the youngest boy. There was 12 children altogether, and they raised 6 of them. And Margaret was the oldest. She was born in 1877, and she married Joe Mabey, and they lived in Clearfield.
She was born in Kaysville then, at that
Yeah,
point, I guess.
Yes. And her son, Phil Mabey, he died 3 years ago.
Is Myron his other son?
Myron is another son. But Phil had some things that from Granddad, artifacts,
I know his wife real well.
and she may
Is she still alive?
she may still have.
She's
some
only
of
got
those things.
burned, isn't she? Her hands or something.
No, I think that was Joe Jr.'s wife, Amar.
Possibility.
Her hand got burned.
See, I'm related. I'm related to him too. My grandmother was a Navy.
No, we might get some artifacts if we can find out which one of his family got that stuff. He brought quite a bunch of stuff to one of our reunions. And,
This is Phil, before he died.
then William Edward was the next one, and he died at 12 days old. And then Henry Phillips Payne was born November 1881, and he went to Idaho when they homesteaded the Minidoka project and lived up there.
Is he, how does Retta Sessions Payne fit in?
Okay, the next one, Joseph Phillips Payne, was born 1883. He's the one that married Retta.
And
She's still alive too.
Yes, she's still alive, and she's getting,
we got a videotape of her if you ever want to see it.
she's doing very well for age. She's really getting old. And see, all these sons went up to Idaho and homesteaded when they worked on the Minidoka project, and they all took homesteads up there. And Joseph Payne became the mortician in Burley. The Payne mortuary is still there.
Yeah, I can remember going to my uncle's funeral when I was just a kid to that mortuary.
And then there was a girl named Martha, and she died at 3 days old. And then John Phillips Payne, born 87, and he homesteaded in Idaho and lived there the rest of his life.
And he married
Steed.
Steed. What was her name?
Verna
Verna.
Steed.
Do you know by chance where the Phillips lived when they lived here in Syracuse?
Which ones?
The Phillips family. I know they were from Kaysville, but we got one Phillips on the 1880 census.
No, I don't know. There's a lot of them around now. And then my dad was born 1890, and he homesteaded in Idaho, and then he turned his farm over to Henry, and came down, and when Granddad turned 70, I guess, and started taking care of the farm down here. And then the Harriet Robinson, that's Margaret's mother, she was born in 92, and then she was 10 years old when her mother died in 1902, Harriet Angley. And so Harriet was 10 years old. She went and lived with her sister Margaret in Clearfield. And Catherine, called her Katie, she was kind of taking care of the house, the home, when after her mother died, and in 1914 she was building a fire in the cook stove, and she was using some kerosene to get it going, and it kind of blew up on her, and she spilled the kerosene and spilled it on her, and she died of the burns. 1914. And then there was a Dora Isabel, born in 1897 and died when she was 8 years old, 1905. And then there's 2 more babies that were stillbirth. So they raised 6 out of the 12.
These all from the same mother?
Yes.
Well, the Hattie that went to live with Margaret, did she ever marry
Yes, she married Robinson,
Robinson?
and
When
they had one girl. That's Margaret Robinson, my cousin. You talked to her on the phone.
that's now Margaret Umberger.
Humber, yeah. She's the one I was trying to get this genealogy from, and she kind of hangs on to it, so.
Well, your brother Noel and I walked down from junior high one day to his Aunt Hattie's, and I was thinking your Aunt Hattie was Joe and Phil Mavy's mother. But that was their.
That was Aunt Maggie, that was Margaret, the oldest one. And, but Harriet, Aunt Hattie was, she was mostly raised by her older sister, Margaret, in Clearfield, and then
Who'd she marry?
married Earl Robinson, and he worked at the Kennecott Copper, and they had the one daughter. And then Harriet died just, when was it, 86 or? No, December of 78. She was 86 years old when she died.
Who did your mother marry?
Henry Payne had his homestead going, and my dad was up there helping him with his homestead, and my grandfather Burton had a homestead south of Burley, a place called Kenyon. It was an early settlement, and so he met her up there and married her in Idaho. This Kenyon in Idaho was, after they got it settled, then they redistributed the water system and cut Kenyon off, so everybody that had settled there had to move out, move all their buildings and everything. Go somewhere else.
Oh, I think I can remember your mother. When did she die?
41.
I'd only be 13. And then your father married Nora about when?
44,
44.
43, somewhere in there.
What was there?
During the war.
How many children from your mother?
We had 5 in the family, 2 girls and 3 boys. You probably remember my brother Noel.
Yeah, he's just, I think, a year older than me. Is he or
He was the youngest. He died a year ago of cancer. And my other brother Burton died 3 years ago. My 2 sisters are still living in Salt Lake.
And then the second family, I know Ken was
Kenny's the only one.
the only one. Just for our interest, when did you take up flying?
Well, I went in the Air Force when the Army Air Corps, World War II, 1943.
I can even envision you in a uniform coming home.
At the end of World War II, I got out, came home, and worked at Hillfield for a couple of years, and then they called me back in, and I stayed in for 30 years.
And you flew then. Then you sort of had your little plane here.
Yeah, after I retired in '72,
Oh.
But he
building
flew,
a runway.
you flew all through the World War II, the Korean War, and the Vietnam War.
Yes, well, World War II, I was a bombardier and navigator and radar operator on B-17s. I didn't see any combat in World War II. And when I went back in, I went through fighter pilot school and flew jet fighters. And just just in time for the Korean War. And
I remember that.
the F-80s and F-86s in Korea. And then I was getting a little old, but they still got me back in the jets in Vietnam.
Is that right?
Flew RF-101s in Vietnam. And my son was over there at the same time. He was flying O2s.
We had an interview here a little over a month ago, the first person to fly, we think, in Syracuse. And he used to bring his plane and land and give people rides. You know who we're talking about?
Stoker?
Alden Fisher,
Fisher.
who was raised by Aunt Kate Stoker.
Yes. I remember that airplane. One weekend he was landing over Floyd Hamlin's place, that big pasture there, and giving everybody rides for, I forget, $5 a ride.
You make a little money then, wouldn't it?
He said $2, so I don't know. I think back then $2 had been quite a bit.
All I know was way more than I had, so we just had to watch.
We was pushing your T model with 2 bits worth of gas, one station in there.
Soon after that, he crashed it, and that was the end of his flying.
Yeah, landed in the mountains there, didn't he?
Yeah, trying to get across some peaks, and he was upper part of Immigration Canyon, wasn't it? Oh, I just thought you might be interested in that.
Yeah, I remember hearing of the people up there carrying the parts of the airplane out now. They were telling
Clark Sessions and some of those.
How hard it was to haul the pieces of airplane out by hand.
I think he give it to him. He got the motor out or something. I forget just what he told. Well, now your father, did he have any interest in salt works or lake or any of that?
Yes, when we moved here from Idaho, the little salt works out in Hooper was going, and my granddad and Ed Bill was doing that. It was just a small operation, and the lake was going out pretty far at that time. That was 1928. And so I can remember rushing out to Hooper whenever there was a west wind to start the pump. And they only did that for a couple of 3 years until the lake was too far out. And then Granddad turned his share of that property to Ed Bill, and I understand he sold it to somebody that lived out there later. But then after the lake went out, along in the 30s during the Depression, he used to go out and haul salt from the flats in and sell it. And the salt, as I remember, sugar beets was $5 a ton, and they haul salt in and get the same price, $5 a ton for the salt. And it was a lot quicker getting a ton of salt than it was raising a ton of sugar beets all summer.
Yeah, you
And
get
so
your load of salt in one afternoon.
we had a hired man, Bill Forrester, and they had a little sled they'd made, and kept it way out there at the edge of the mud, and they'd take the wagons out as far as the ground was solid, and then they'd hook the horses onto the sled and go through the mud till they got up on the solid salt. Once they got on that solid salt, it was like pavement. It was just hard. And then they'd shovel the sled full and bring it in and shovel it onto the wagon. 3 or 4 trips of the sled and have a wagon load and bring it in and unload it. And then most of it was trucked to Idaho and Wyoming and places, I guess for stock salt. And I remember we had to during the Depression, we had to take barter for a lot of it. We get 5-gallon cans of honey and bushels of apples and things that, whatever the trucker was bringing from up there, why, we'd have to take in trade for salt. And there was, I don't know, 3 or 4 years maybe that went on. And Joe's dad was doing the same thing. Bring it up and put it in big piles, and a truck would show up and one load of salt, so sack on their trucks. And it really helped out during the Depression. Things were awfully tight.
Was this used mostly for animals?
I think that's what they used it for, was for stock.
For livestock, went to Montana, we sold one boat.
Yeah, they usually, Idaho, Montana, Wyoming, they usually hauled it up.
One time, I don't know, probably wasn't in your time, but maybe you heard about it. The railroad used to brine the railroad ties instead of like they do now. They used to dip them and leave them in there, I think, all winter, and then come out, and that was supposed to be a cure for railroad ties. You ever heard of that?
No, but I know if they soaked in salt, that wood will last. Kills all the bacteria in it. Granddad still had a boat when they started building the railroad across the
Promontory.
on the trestle, and I remember him telling about the big storm they had, and it blew down some of the new railroad they built up there, and
Those
piles of ties, and they floated all over the lake.
A lot of them ended here in the shores of Syracuse.
So he could gather up ties and take them back, and they'd buy them from him. So he spent a few months going around the lake picking up railroad ties out of the lake and hauling them back up there where they were building the trestle, and
That'd be about 1910 or someplace around there.
selling those ties back to them.
Well, we about exhausted you, but
Very interesting.
Uh, has the acreage been here bigger than this at one time? Dickie Adams bought all of this that Galbraith had to the south of you. Did you sell the Mannings?
I really don't know how much acreage, like you were saying, he was buying and selling a lot. But,
He sold to Galbraith, didn't he?
well, I think he did sell some to Galbraith too. And
But that was lakeshore
Yeah.
land, I think.
then I don't know how much right around this area he had, whether he owned this Bybee farm or not, but
He owned something
he
east
kept-
of here.
Well, there was 20 acres. The east, it's the east 20 of this, Nelson has it now. And when we came down from Idaho, they had this farm and that 20 acres. He called it the Lost 20. And it was half pasture and half farm. And I used to have the job of herding the cows up to the road and put them in the pasture up there every morning and going up and bring them back every evening.
I remember that.
And I had to take it slow so they got a lot of feed along the road going and coming.
Wouldn't lose their milk.
And so that was the state of the farm, and until my dad died, and then just before he died, he sold that 20 acres to Horse and Bybee. And so then this part's been in the family since the first.
Let's talk about some early families possibly you've heard of or know something. Have you ever heard of the Vaughn family?
No.
Married Orson Bibey's sister, and he was raised by him. And his mother, I think, was named Elizabeth, Orson Bibey's mother.
Oh, well, that kind of rings a bell. I think I've heard Orson talk about the bonds. And we were pretty close to Orson Bibey, you know, trade work all the time. He didn't have any sons, so whenever it was haying time or something, we'd help him, and he'd help us trade work.
Here's a story we've heard, and I think Orson Bibey told it to Dean Manning, but maybe you can confirm it, since you know the Frarys and knew Pete or Frank. You know, this before his mother died, gave birth to a baby girl. And about 6 weeks after, she died. And the Bentleys were the ones who raised it. Her name was Florence. According to Dean Manning, Orson Bibey said that they had a mare that was just had a foal or something, or maybe, anyway, they fed it mare's milk. You ever heard that story?
Yes, I've heard of milking the mares for the babies. I couldn't connect it with that particular case, but I heard Granddad talk about it.
Well, they pretty well raised that girl for a while. It's just too bad you wasn't over there, because we had Frary grand people and Bentley's grandchildren. They're named Stimpsons. You ever heard of them?
Mm-hmm. I felt real bad that I couldn't go to that.
And we had the Walkers from Farmington that was on the ranch. And then, of course, we had the Frary grandchildren. And we had Joe, who was a grandchild of James, and he was one of the first ones over there, or was already on the island when she died, I think.
They were living there.
Yeah. And then if we'd had the Paynes too, hey, that was quite a reunion.
I saved a piece of the paper on that. It's a pretty good article about it.
Yeah, this eventually will all get in a book, and there'll be a place for George Frary and his family. Don't know how much we can write. We've identified 160 families that lived in Syracuse the first 50 years. That's from the 70s until 1920. And we've got 50 family histories out of this 160 families. And we still want more. And we've got this on tape, but you don't have a family history written, do you, of your grandfather?
No, I'm still going to write it. Lost all my notes here.
You get together with Margaret.
Well, about next fall will be about where your grandfather is and where he enters into Syracuse. We could have something by then. We'd appreciate it.
I think this is really good what you're doing, and I wish we could have done it a long time ago.
Yeah,
It would have been a lot better.
Another thing we're doing,
It's better now than later.
Earl, is say next year it'll be the 50th anniversary of bombing of Pearl Harbor, World War II. And over the next 5 years, we're collecting, somebody will be contacting you for your picture and the information regarding World War II, which we want to put in a booklet. There was 116 that served from Syracuse in World War II. We'd like to get their picture and their rank, where they served, and the branch of service, and any experiences or their feelings or that, and put it in a pamphlet.
And you say only one killed?
Ned?
And your brother?
That, to my knowledge, the only
One taken prisoner. 2.
Jern and Eastman. prisoners.
Well, wasn't Roy Eastman killed in Okinawa?
I don't know.
Roy?
I understood they did, that there was Ned and Roy Eastman.
I've heard that since I've been around doing this. I'm trying to think who has your name.
Wasn't Lewis Jensen taken prisoner too?
Yes. Jared and Lewis both was prisoners. But we feel like that would be.
Miller was prisoner too, wasn't he?
Who?
Herb Miller?
I can't remember that.
You know, this is something maybe on this. I'm gonna be too busy to get involved, but you ought to bring a bunch of these guys together and then they could,
Yeah, I think Rex Barber's expressed a real interest. I wondered about maybe having him serve on a committee and getting a group together that could pull it together. Because it could be done, you know, this is the first 50 years, next December 7th, but it went on for 5 years and there's various events. So we could,
Well, that might be a good section to have in the museum. What, how's that?
By the way-
Plan's coming on the museum.
by the way, I don't have a key with me, but I got a key that'll let me any place in the church. But I got a lead, somebody gave me a hint. Remember that list of all of the veterans?
The bronze plaque?
Yeah. Delores wanted to give me the hint. He says he's never seen it over there and don't think it's there.
Over to the city building.
And no, we need to go upstairs in what we used to call the old cry room, the photo room, and right now it's used for the organ pipes and stuff. But they put a lot of trophies and stuff up there. You know where I'm talking about?
yeah, yeah.
I've never been up there.
I have.
Yeah, that might be up there when there's remodeling.
Well,
It wouldn't be in that room, though. Is there a closet or adjacent to it or something?
oh, there's a lot of space up in there.
Let's do it. Because we need to get that. you
Yeah,
know,
there
that-
was they had a little kind of a ceremony right after World War II ended when everybody was coming home. And they tried to get all the returned veterans in on that. And if you could find a record of that, it would probably be a lot of
That
information.
done through the church.
Mm-hmm. And Mrs. Knighton gave
Well, I think she was the one that stimulated the plaque and helped with it.
she was involved, and she gave a talk and named names at that time, I recall. I don't know
They're
if
all
there's any
there.
record made of that or not.
They're all there, but due to Thurgood, see, he'd shipped out in Merchant Marines and was home, or was he in the Army first? He went in both, but his name was on the plaque, and we were standing there looking at it, and Mrs. Holbrook came up and said, well, it'll be good for you boys to get your names up there too. Delore, he ran into a tirade, and he took his knife and cut his off, chipped it off of there.
Is that right?
Yeah.
That sounds like the way Duder wrote. I was trying to place your age. Seems like you're just a year older than my sister Dorothy.
You're younger.
You're younger,
I'm
okay.
68
Okay, she's,
this month. Well, she was in a year ahead of me. So.
yeah, and she'll be 69 February, so.
That's unusually serving the 3 wars.
Yeah,
She's
that's
6 years older than I am.
about the only one, I think.
I wonder if that's in the green history book in all 3.
They had a lot of us old folks in Vietnam. They had one group that flew the old World War II Gooney-birds, C-47s,
Yeah, George,
and they
Bernard Fisher flew one of those.
they had a bunch of old guys that had flown them in World War II to get this unit going, and they put sophisticated electronic gear in the cargo part. And then they got these old timers. A lot of them have been doing a desk job for years, and they brought them out and put them in these C-47s, and then they put brand new second lieutenant in for co-pilots, and they fly around in the middle of the night, and they get a fix on every radio transmission that went on all over their dam. And
Is that why you did that?
no, I was flying a fighter. They said there was a generation gap. These old timers were close to 50 years old, and these kids were 24 or 23, and said they had a real hard time with trying to understand each other between the pilot and co-pilot, because that was a real generation
Well, I was a
gap.
school teacher, and there's no difference between those kids and me trying to teach them.
They didn't even want to live together in the same barracks, so it was 2 stories. All the old timers lived up in the second floor, and all the second lieutenants on the bottom. But I was 47. I flew my 47th mission on my 47th birthday. They were going to send that to the papers, see if they thought that was interesting, but they didn't.
They never printed. That's
They
something,
even
something
picked
we
me
ought
up
to
to
remember.
fly the airplane, number 47 airplane too.
We hope to bring our history up into post-World War II, about 1960. We feel that somebody can take it from there, because Syracuse changes so much after World War II. And you get those housing areas in and all the influx of people.
Yeah, you have to cut it off somewhere, I guess. It'll be that.
And one area we're working on is the history of the Japanese people coming in. That was an important thing.
Mhm.
Do you know of any Japanese that served in World War II?
I wouldn't know. I'm sure there was.
I don't know if
some.
they're still here, but there's quite a few of them. All of the Akasakis.
Well,
Couple
the
of them.
Yamadas, but Sam, you remember Sam?
Amulata, yeah.
He
You gotta
served in
find that out
Japanese
some
army.
way, because it's not in the green
And
book.
his 2 brothers
Japanese
were
were listed.
served in
I'm
the
sure that there was.
I remember I think his name was George Kikuchi. Or Akasaka, was it? One of them was in that all-Japanese battalion in Italy.
Mhm.
They made a movie of that. And I even watched it here the other day. Had a
I
good time.
would think that Kano or Roy Mia would have a pretty good idea of that.
Roy didn't. I checked with Roy. He didn't seem to.
Tommy Mata was the one. He was serving the army.
Tommy Madden.
Mm-hmm.
Was
Both
it
he and Muss.
was it Sam?
Sam was an officer in a concentration camp in Japan.
Yeah. He went over there and got caught up in the war and couldn't get back.
He went over there to be in the army.
And here's an interesting thing. I taught his sons that came here for their last year, and he wanted them to learn English, and so they came over, and I taught them in my history class. That was something. Now Tom is already helping us on Japanese history. Muss is in real bad shape. Muss is.
Tommy Madden, yes.
You remember Muss?
He's not too well.
He's just under Tom. Tom's
He's
the
out with
old.
back surgery.
Yeah.
Hospital saw him.
But that's a good source. Have George contact him too and say, we'd like a list of all of those.
We're just getting those that's went
Sure.
from Syracuse.
Yeah.
You know,
I think you can turn this thing off now.